What's up, everybody? I'm Jacob Wheeler, and today we're going to deep dive into crankbait bass fishing, how, why, and when I use them. Okay, so obviously there's a lot of different things that we could talk about a crankbait. And so what we're going to do in this video is we're going to sort of start off by simplifying this. So if you're a beginner fisherman or you're an advanced tournament angler, I'm going to give you guys a good understanding, but we're going to go from start off slow and then start to climb up in the advanced part at the end of this video. So the first thing, let's just do an overview of crankbaits, okay? Because so many anglers are just getting into tournaments or getting into fishing in general. And so I want to explain to you like why, what a crankbait like really does and what a crankbait really is. So like first thing is depth. The biggest thing that you need to understand is depth that you are fishing and sort of correlate that to a crankbait, okay? So like for instance, a smaller lip crankbait like this dude right here, he's a little tiny, that's what it's called. The smaller the lip, typically the shallower it's going to dive, okay? That depth right there, you're reeling your crankbait and that little lip right there provides vibration and it provides how deep it's going to dive. So obviously this guy right here is going to dive a heck of a lot deeper than this guy right here. And that's sort of a pretty simple understanding. So when I'm selecting a crankbait, typical good shallow running crankbait is going to be running between that 3 and 5 foot zone. That guy right there is going to run 3 to 5. And you'll see that on the packaging of like sort of what's going on, but that's sort of a general understanding of what makes a crankbait, dive depth. Now there's different types of lips. You have like these rounded lips, then you have square lips, then you have no lip, like a lipless, and then you of course you have like wiggle wart type lips and all these different things. So we're going to talk about each category and sort of dive into like when I throw each one. So we'll start over here on the first one, which is a flat side crankbait. A flat side, there's two different flat sides right here. And they're both very similar. One's smaller, it's called tiny, and one's like a little bit larger, it's called slim. The big thing with a flat side crankbait is typically it's gonna be a bait that I throw in the fall when pressure's high, or in the springtime when the water temperature is a little bit cooler, because all it comes down is the action of the bait. And what I mean by that is, so typically on a crankbait like slim or tiny, the wiggle wobble, I'm gonna rate this, okay? So like a shad wrap or a flat side crankbait is going to have a tighter wobble, okay? So I'm gonna give like a slim right here, like a 3 or a 2 as far as his aggressiveness, as far as wiggling, okay? Where, say, for instance, like a wiggle wart, if you've ever seen a wiggle wart, it has a wider lip. He really, he goes crazy left and right, okay, and dances everywhere. He's going to be a 10. So to give you an understanding of sort of the rating of aggressiveness, 10 over like a 2 or a 3. So the whole reason behind a flat side crankbait is really came down to the point of giving those fish a little bit more of a subtle look and understanding of like what you sort of want to throw this when water's a little bit colder and the fish are a little bit more lethargic, pre-spawn and in some areas where those fish are just pulling up and they want that little bit more subtle. Or if there's more pressure, you go into a creek arm and you were throwing a more aggressive crankbait and now you need to show them something a little bit different. The advantages of that crankbait is that, I've thrown a lot of these are crankbaits that I just pulled out of my box. They all have line ties on them. They have teeth marks on them. I know they work, but that's sort of the mindset behind it. Now, this crankbait right here will run probably like 3 feet, where this crankbait, because of the bill angle, you could sort of see the steepness of that bill. This guy, if he was a little bit like the angle, he's gonna run shallower, and it's not even the depth. Sometimes the angle changes that as well. So that's sort of my mindset behind a flat side. And a flat side crankbait is become very popular in the grand scheme of it. This bait right here is really good for rocky banks. It's good for pea gravelly banks. It's good for those typical areas. Rock is well known for a flat side or any kind of crankbait, especially or even some wood as well. Like cranking around wood in the fall, I'll throw a shad color in a tiny. sort of imitating that fit, that fish or that bait fish that they're eating. So that's sort of the thing. Now jumping into like a very traditional, I'm just gonna explain this one. If there's one crankbait that you need as a beginner or as any angler, you need this one in your boat. It's a square bill, and a square bill is a four-wheeler of my crankbaits. And the reason behind this is he has a square lip, of course, square bill, and this is a circuit board lip. So the circuit board lip, the advantage of a circuit board lip is he's thinner, which ultimately a thinner lip can help with a faster dive and getting it down there a little bit faster. So dive angle does change that as well. But the whole thing is why I love a square lipped crankbait is he's going to run that 3 to 5 foot zone. He's great for summertime cranking. He's good for springtime cranking. He's good for the fall. He's really good around cover. This bait right here does well of deflecting off of cover and going through things. That's why I call him my four-wheeler. He's my everyday 3 to 5 foot zone. And he goes down there and he'll deflect off of cover because of that square lip. There's more protection for your hook. So when it, where if you look at Tiny, he hits off of that, like that hook comes out there and it'll catch the log a little bit easier. Whereas square bill, the hook protection from the bill is a lot wider. And now aggressive, he's gonna be a little bit more aggressive because of how wide the bill is. But that's really the advantage. And I've caught, I catch a lot of fish when you think of like crankbait fishing, it's reaction. So the reason why a crankbait is such a great, overall, it's such a great lure to throw is because bass get to the point where they're like, man, they get to the point where they're hard to catch at times just dragging a bait. You gotta make them react. And so when you go and you crank a crankbait down there and you deflect off of something, that deflection makes them sit there and look at it and say, okay, I have a split second to either I'm gonna bite that or I'm gonna let it swim by. That's the scenario, what they sort of, I think that they think when a crankbait goes by. The one thing I will say about crankbait fishing, typically you will not be catching that many fish if you are not bumping the bottom. That's the reason why depth selection is so very important in the situation that you're fishing, okay? So now you could also overdo that as well. So what I mean by that is, so this Rocco square bill, that's a Rattles square bill right here. If he's bumping the bottom too hard, say he's a foot deep, if he's down there just grinding the bottom, sometimes that's so unnatural that you won't generate the bite. You sort of like try to match up your crankbait. So, but if it's like 2.5 feet and it's not like just digging into the bottom too deep, you can generate a bite. Like if I'm throwing this DT20 crankbait, this giant deep diving crankbait in 2 foot of water, the odds of me catching a bass on this are gonna probably be pretty slim because just the overall look of this bait is gonna be, the action's not gonna be right. So you sort of wanna match your depth close to it. And if you're cranking that bait down there and it's bumping the bottom, slowing down and letting that bait rise back up and then cranking a little bit, you can slow down. I think a lot of people in the grand scheme of it all, when they crankbait fish, they think, oh, cast and wind. And yes, you can definitely do that. But the thing about it is you sometimes stopping and varying your retrieve will let you get a few more bites. Like a lot of times I'll bump the bottom, and once I hit that bottom, I'll slow down, especially in colder water. As I crank that crankbait down there and I'm pulling it, I stop it and pull it, and I'm bumping it. Because you gotta imagine, okay, if a bass really thinks this is a crawdad, crawdad's not running at Mach 7, all the time. He could be bumping on the bottom on some rocks, and he's bumping down through there, and I slow down. He'll stop, he'll slow down, he'll sort of move around. And so that's what I'm trying to imitate, especially with like a crawdad color crankbait. So square bills are a must if you want to be in any way, shape, or form. First crankbait you should buy is a square bill. This one right here, I've got a lot of fish on that Rocco. So I'm going to say that 3 to 5 foot zone, day in and day out. You have to have, you might not have to have a box, but you need a couple crankbaits, a couple of those square bills in your boat at some point in time. it's just like the overall, like for shallow water cranking, it's really, really good. And so you can definitely catch a lot of fish doing that. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is, these are two different square bills, okay? This guy, silent. This guy, rattle. Ooh, loud. When to throw silent versus a rattle. Now, this can be a little bit confusing at times. Most of the time for me, the water clarity, I throw a semi-silent one or a very subtle as far as sound, because you actually got to think, okay, when there's crankbaits running through the water, the actual split rings and your hooks are making sound as well. You hear that right there? Same thing within the water. I want to surprise the fish. I don't want them to know that bait's coming. If they're sitting on this log right here, and I'm sitting in this log right here, and he's sitting right there, and he hears, and if it's super clean water, and he knows that sucker's coming, and he can hear it get closer and closer. And maybe that anticipation is sometimes good, but I feel like sometimes the subtle, he's sitting right on this other side, and he goes, boop, comes over that log, doop, eats it. So when I throw a silent crankbait, I throw it majority of the time, okay? I throw that, I'm gonna throw this 90% of the time. I try to go silent or subtle. Like this is a DT8, has a little rattle to him, subtle, okay? Loud, harder rattle, two situations. Number one, grass lakes. When you have a lot of grass, you have a lot of cover. So when that fish has to find that bait and you're cranking, which a crankbait typically, you know, you normally throw a lipless crankbait. We'll talk about that in a second. A crankbait, it's more on the advanced side to throw a crankbait in grass. So if you're trying to learn, maybe cranking grass is not the first thing you want to learn. It takes some time to get to that level, but because you have to let that crankbait hit the grass and you got to pull it out and stuff like that. So not my first recommendation on you know, work your way up. But when a rattle is good, it's dirty water. Okay, stained water. I remember a scenario. I'm going to tell you the story. I remember a scenario. I was fishing a tournament in Indiana, and I'm cranking down this bank with a buddy of mine in the back, and we're cranking. We're both throwing square lip crankbaits. Okay, and like I've always, you know, be in the front. I get the first cast, cranking down this rock bank, and you're getting parallel to the bank and casting down the bank. You know, like I said, making sure that I hit the bottom. And he's throwing up there as well. And he caught 3 to I had not caught a fish. We're both throwing the same color crankbait. And I'm like, what the heck's going on? Like same action, same color. I'm just like, I don't know, I'm just getting lucky. He's talking smack back there, like, I got him all, I'm catching another one. And I'm like, we're fishing a tournament, which I don't mind because it's like we split the money anyway at the end of the day. But I'm still frustrated because I'm like, why is this happening the way it is? There's always a reason. Remember this, like for the most part, there's a reason behind bass fishing of like why they do what they do. So I pick his crankbait up, same color and everything, it's a black chartreuse. And I grab it, I grab mine, it's silent. And I grab his, and it's a rattle. I said, you sucker. I tie on a rattle and crankbait, and he never caught a bass the rest of the night. That right there made me a huge believer in rattles. But then I've also had the same thing happen in cleaner water where my buddy was throwing a rattle and crankbait and caught a few fish in the front of the boat, and I had a silent crankbait and I caught them 3 to 1 behind him. So that's why I believe what I believe. Not saying you might kill them in clear water on a rattle and crankbait. For me, typically I try to be more subtle in the cleaner water, and then that's when I sort of use the rattles in that scenario. Now, okay, diving into several different things. Now you can sort of go into a little bit deeper diving crankbaits like a DT6. This is still in the shallow realm of shallow water. This is probably the #1 selling crankbait, one of the most tournament winning crankbaits ever created. And the reason for that is if I can't hit the bottom on my riprap banks or rocky banks with this bait right here, I need to go deeper. So the next step to deeper depth and to have still a little bit of thump is going to a little bit deeper diving crankbait, but still the right size. Especially you think pre-spawn is probably this is the best time. Pre-spawn, spawn, you know, post-spawn is the best time to throw a crankbait because those fish are sort of in that 10-foot and shallower zone. unless of course you're talking about big deep diving crankbaits when they get out on shore. But I'm talking to a lot of people a lot of anglers out there that are just starting, and it's a little bit, you have more time throughout the year to use a shallower running crankbait to generate bites than you do a deep diving crankbait. So that's why I'm sort of jumping in on that. So DT6, again, you know, for me, subtle rattle, okay? So that rattle right there is not very loud. It just adds a little bit to it. Doesn't really it's not gonna really, I'm not worried about the rattle on that spectrum of the things. So that's a really good crankbait to sort of select when you're trying to get down there. Again, hitting the bottom is key, and it has a probably wiggle wobble. We didn't get to talk about that. So the square bill, I'm gonna give this a 6 on the wiggle wobble, because we gave the flat side about a 3, 2 to a 3. This is gonna be a 6 as far as aggressiveness. Where a DT6 is gonna be right there, probably, I'm gonna say to a 5. So he's in between, he's a little bit stepped down from there. And sometimes it's not going to matter. And as in the springtime, when the fish first roll up and it's warm, if it's warm water, like in the 50s, like 50s and low 60s, man, they're gonna be chomping. So an aggressive action sometimes can generate more bites because they see it, they're gonna bite it. That's why I think red sometimes is such a great color, is because it's so visual. And when they come up from the spawn, they're just aggressive. Like they're ready to go up there, and they've been out there in the middle of the lake all winter long. They're ready to eat, dang it. And a lot of times I truly think, red does imitate a crayfish really well. But as well with that, I think there's something about the big females, they need crayfish and crawdads to sort of like help them with the spawning process. It seems like they gorge themselves on crayfish right before they go to spawn. And I don't know the science behind it. It's something that I've personally seen. I feel like it happens a lot. So that's why I think that helps as well on that scenario. Now, so we sort of dove into the flat sides part. We talked a little bit about the square bill side of things. Now we talked about, how you're wiggle wobbling, with this side. Let's talk about a lipless crankbait to an extent, and a lipless crankbait, and where it gets its action, because we sort of got into some other things here. A lipless crankbait is a crankbait that has no lip, but it sinks typically, okay? So most models will sink, so you have to reel it, otherwise it's gonna be laying on the bottom flat, okay? So in this scenario, when's a lipless crankbait a good bait to use? For me, it really comes down to throwing this in, number one is grass, because it has no lip. It's not going to dive down into the grass as much, and typically the way it swims is about that angle right there. So you got to factor in some like little grass right here, and they're just going out there here and it's ticking the top of the grass, and when it gets caught in there, you can pull and you can rip. You can pull this bait out of there, and it's gonna go up, where like other crankbaits, if it goes down there and I pull, what's it gonna wanna do? It's gonna wanna dig deeper into the grass. So that's why a lipless crankbait is such a great bait to throw in submerged grass. I'm not talking about the grass you see at the top of the water that you're gonna be able to pull this through there, probably not. But submerged grass is why it's so good. And you do, again, typical on lipless, they have a lot of rattles in them. And that sort of matches up with what I was talking about. I like rattles and grass because they're in so much cover, the fish have to find them. There's so much there, a lot of times they have to find the bait. And that's what I think, and typically, water's a little stained. So you see a lot of crawfish imitating lipless crankbaits. Of course, blue and chrome is a good one as well. You can't go wrong with that, and that's a good one as well. But crayfish imitators are popular in the springtime as well. And so like the scenario on this is like, I look at these as my tool for fishing those grass flats and really trying to comb those areas. Another thing that's really good for as well is fishing on pea gravel banks and flatter banks. So like I said, hey, this crankbait right here with the square bill, if I have in 1 foot of water, I can't control the depth, right? I can't control, like I'm digging the bottom too much, and I don't think I'm gonna generate the bite because this bait's not having a lot of good action. I can control the depth with this a little bit better, and I can keep that bait up, and I'm just like, and it's hitting the bottom, hitting the bottom, hitting the bottom. I pull it up, doop, locks up, you know? So I'm able, this is a great bait to throw in that 1 to 3 foot zone where I can control the depth. It is the one problem with this. Its Achilles heel is wood, okay? Wood is not the best for lipless crankbait because you gotta, again, think. Where the square bill's really good, has the bill to protect him. This has no bill, it only has the nose. And so he has free range of that hook coming in there. One thing that you can do though, if you do wanna fish it in wood, my boy MDJ sort of taught me this, is you can take the back hook off. Okay, not the front. Think about this. The back hook is actually your nose, does protect it a little bit, but your back hook off and use one hook. And so with these, especially with the lipless crankbaits that have a little bit wider nose, you can do that and it sort of protects it because of the way angle it sits, it hits it, deflects, and that sort of protects that hook a little bit where that back hook will typically hang. So that's the scenario there. Now as far as, so we just sort of gave an overview on that and sort of rattles. We talked about, you know, a couple different crankbait selections. I will tell you, I'm gonna do a quick overview on this just because I wanna give you guys an understanding of this. DT10s or deeper diving crankbaits, mid-depth is where I'm going here. A DT10, a DT8, there's a lot of different manufacturers out there that make products like that, but this is a crankbait that, this is sort of the deeper diving of the pre-spawn time frame, spawn, you know, like right when they sort of first get out there, if they're in that, you know, 10 feet zone. So like this is, again, if I'm fishing from a boat or I'm not fishing from a boat and I'm just trying to sort of put myself in a position to like get down there. Like when I'll throw this crankbait is, again, if I can't hit bottom with this and I'm not hitting bottom with this guy, you typically, 90% of your bites is when you're generating contact with the bottom. So you need to, unless you're on a northern fishery for smallmouth, a crankbait depth is very important in hitting the bottom. So that's when I pick a DT10 because it has a little bit more diving depth. And then of course I have a couple right here for like the summertime. This is a completely different subject for a different day, summertime cranking, deep diving crankbaits. But I brought these because I wanted to show you guys there is an option. And this is a unbelievable way to catch fish, but that's a different subject for a different day. So bigger, deeper, this one runs 14, this one runs 20. But again, with all of these consistency-wise, it's all about hitting the bottom. If I'm selecting the depth zone of where the fish are at, and I have to hit the bottom. And it's trial and error. Like the fish might be up there in 3 foot day, you know, one day, and then all of a sudden they back off and get a cold front, and I pick a DT10 up, and I crank the same rocks that I was cranking, but down there in 8 to 10 feet, and I catch them on this bait, they won't bite that bait because they're not up there anymore. So there's scenarios it makes, again, bass fishing can be very hard, but you can simplify it. It can be confusing, but it can be simplified as well because there's a reason behind what they're doing. There's a reason why each bait catches them in certain scenarios, and there's a reason why the bass are doing what they're doing. So just trying to figure it out. Now, I'm not saying it makes sense every day, but there's a reason behind it. So that being said, you know, even these crawfish imitators, I'm going to sort of jump into it. It's like wiggle warts or, you know, stuff like, you know, these are crawfish imitators. These are really wide wigglers. And this is well known for highland reservoir fisheries. And what I mean by highland reservoir, it's more so like you know, you have rocky lakes and lakes that have a lot of bluffy banks. That's a typical highland reservoir. There's like Martin, Dale Hollow, Table Rock, like the Ozarks. These are really well known for those places. So in the baits that have a lot of action and dancing action like this, I'm gonna rate this a 10 because it's the most aggressive crankbait that I know of. You have to allow that bait to hit the bottom, and then again, bottom contact is key, and then you let that bait sort of work for you. And what I mean by that is you crank that crankbait down there and you slow your retrieve down there because once you maintain that depth and that crankbait's just dancing all over the place, and that's why it's almost such a great crawdad imitator because he's like trying to get away from a bass. And so even though he's got a lot of action, he does sort of that hunting action, like, and what happens is, like, as they're deflecting over rocks, you're letting that bait sort of just stay down there and grind and sort of like, and generate the bite. So that's sort of the overview on crankbait selection. Now there's other options, we can go into this even more, but I wanted to give a first overview on that. Now we can go into the last thing on this, well, not the last, but is color selection. Keep it simple to an extent. Now, being a bass pro and touring professionally across the country, I have a lot of baits. I do have a lot of baits, but I do simplify my selection depending on what I'm gonna deal with. Dirtier water, springtime, I'm going to look at crawdad imitators. So from, all the way from pre-spawn to like winter time to basically I start thinking of crayfish middle of December all the way to about April time frame, middle of April time frame. Depending on where you're in the country, even if you're a little bit further north, it could be like later, into early May and whatnot. So it just depends on what the stage of the fish are in. So crawdad imitators, water's cleaner. I'm gonna be more natural colors, like this guy right here, more brown, phantom brown. Water's a little bit stained, but not too stained. More of the more natural crawdad imitators, like this guy right here, like a dark brown craw. And then of course, for the dirtier water, these guys, like a chartreuse brown back with a chartreuse, and then of course like a, like a red. Now, the one thing I will also add to the color side of things that's really important, because I tell you guys to make sure that your crankbait is hitting the bottom. People don't sometimes put as much emphasis on the fact of color on the back. Okay, think about this. As if your crankbait is truly hitting the bottom and doing this, a bass a lot of times is above it looking down. So even though this bait is mostly chartreuse, the back color is brown. And so that helps me imitate a crayfish fairly well, because all they're seeing is this right here. So they're seeing that brown and it's flash, 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 flash. That sort of allows for that to, that's what they're seeing. So back color can be very important in that. Now, so we sort of talked about crawdad colors. I don't throw a lot of crawdad colors in the middle of the summertime. I sort of phase out to some different things as well. Now, just because there's a crawdad pattern on this, that does not mean that I only throw that. This is, like if you think in dirty water, they can see those lines all the time. Probably not. This is also a really good bluegill imitator as well. So now, go to post-spawn, shad colors are great, even pre-spawn. Shad colors are great. This is like a traditional shad, gray back. I think one misconception I will say, in dirty water, in stained water, the shad, which is a lot of lakes, they turn white, okay? And when they turn white, because it's dirty water, it's stained, they live in there, and they go from a real natural color like this guy right here to a very white shad. Like it's more of like a white hue. So I actually, a lot of times, if I'm trying to imitate a shad, I don't necessarily go with chartreuses and stuff like that. I will go with white color overall, a white looking pearl color, because that is what a shad actually looks like in stained water. So to give you an understanding on that. But shad colors are always great on that. And then something that I'm definitely gonna think about as they get the post spawn is shad spawn. And then going in, and then you got like, more of like your sexy shad or your Helsinki shad colors like this guy. Add just sort of like an in-between. He's not gonna be super clear water. He's not gonna be super dirty water. He's gonna work sort of both on that side. And then the last imitator that I'm really looking at is more of like a bluegill imitator. This could be a real natural crawdad color, but it also can be, the bluegill as well, because he's got orange on him, he's got a little bit of green on him. This guy can be like a little, So those are the sort of the scenarios that I will sort of throw this guy as well. Sometimes he just sort of like, it's a citrus shad, but typically more post-spawn if the water's dirty. I do like that color. It sort of just depends on what's going on. And then you have your natural shad colors, like this guy right here. Very natural, has this green gizzard shad, has more foil to him, and that's for your cleaner water. And this could be a bluegill, this could be a shad, it could be multiple different things, but typically that's where I'm gonna go more natural when the water's cleaner, or the pressure. That's another thing. When the pressure's higher, I will be more natural on that. So this is a rundown of crankbait bass fishing, man. I could talk about it for a while. The one thing I will add to this, We can't get into rod selection. I typically throw like a 7-foot medium action, 7.2 medium action traditionally on my rods. And I will tell you line size, I like to throw 12-pound line day in and day out. You can throw fluorocarbon, you can throw monofilament. I personally throw that Subfix fluorocarbon, but you know, more cost effective to throw monofilament if you're trying to pick up some line at your local tackle shop. You know, so you can. It just depends. Now, the one thing about a fluorocarbon is you're going to add is it's going to be a little bit more sensitive overall is what you're going to get. But I still throw monofilament at times, and the fluorocarbon does sink, so it's going to actually sink, which should help you in dive depth. So that's the scenarios right there. We went a deep dive into crankbait bass fishing. Look, there's a lot more to this, but I wanted to give you guys a rundown on crankbaits and sort of an overview of crankbait selection so you sort of can make a better decision next time you're in your tackle store if you're buying your first crankbait or your 5th box of crankbaits. Something in here hopefully helped you out next time you're out there on the water.